Hey everyone, so the time has come and my new camera is finally here so I can get rid of this Nikon D600 that's been kind of a pain in the butt for the last 5 years. It's been a pain in the butt because for really a couple reasons. So the first reason, this camera, when I first got it, it suffered from the oiling issue and it would leave a lot of spots on the sensor. Nikon actually warrantied it. I was able to send my camera back. They sent me a refurbished unit that was supposed to not have the issue anymore. I still kind of have dust quite a bit on my sensor from the oiling issue. You can see it's up in the top corner. It doesn't really affect me because I shoot a lot at really low apertures, so the sensor spots and things like that don't show up at, you know, f2.8, f1.8, 1.4, things like that. You just don't see those dust spots. So not a huge issue. The biggest issue that I have with this camera is it's terrible for video. You can't adjust your aperture or your shutter speed once you're in video modes. You have to back out of video mode. You have to guess on your exposure, go back into video mode, and then start recording. Just, it's a complete nightmare from that aspect. And then from a photo standpoint, it has a terrible, terrible autofocus system. The points are gathered in the very center of the sensor. So to take any kind of natural composition like rule of thirds or anything like that, you have to constantly focus and recompose, focus and recompose. Otherwise, you're left kind of cropping after the fact, and then you lose that resolution. So I'm happy to finally be rid of this, and replacing it is going to be my brand new Sony A7iii. So I just got this camera last week. It finally showed up. It was back ordered for quite a while. I didn't order it right when it came out. I was kind of dragging my feet thinking that, you know, something would come out from Nikon, or maybe I'd be able to get my hands on an A7iii or things like that. And I just decided to jump ship, go to Sony, sell all of my stuff. So I'm actually gonna be selling my Nikon gear here now that I've got this in hand and I'm getting more comfortable with it. So what are some things that I like about this camera? The first thing is the size. So if you look at the size of this body compared to this body, and although I will be using some pretty heavy lenses on this camera, the fact that it's much smaller, much lighter, makes it much easier to carry around. So that's number one. The second thing that I find incredibly valuable about this camera is the autofocus system. So I mentioned the Nikon system has everything grouped together in the middle, and that's because basically what they did is they took the autofocus system out of a crop sensor camera and put it in their full frame camera as a way to save cost. And that just made for a terrible user experience. Well, this camera, it actually has the same amount of focusing points as their flagship model, the A9. And here's a little graph kind of depicting what that actually means. So if we look at this image, this is what an image would look like taken on my Nikon D600. So as you can see, all of the focus points are right in the middle of the frame. This makes it very difficult if you want to focus in on like the lower front bumper or the light or things like that. You really have to move the camera around, or you have to zoom out and then crop in after the fact. And you have the same problem with people. So if you're doing portrait shoots or things like that, you're gonna have the same problem. So you're gonna have to focus on the eye and then recompose. With the A7iii, you don't have that problem anymore. Here's what that camera looks like for an automotive shot. So all of those little boxes are focus points. So essentially, I think it's something crazy like 92 or 95% of the sensor is covered with focusing points, which is just, coming from a DSLR, that's just incredible. And it's really amazing. And having shot with this a couple times, I can tell you that you're able to compose your shots using those traditional like rules of thirds and things like that that you weren't able to do with the Nikon D600. So that's been a huge change and huge advantage. So the next thing that I really like about this camera is the fact that you can control everything with your cell phone. So as you can see here, I have the Sony's memory app launched, and as you can see on the back of the camera, I have myself in focus, and then you can see here on the front of the camera that I'm actually able to control the ISO, the shutter speed, the f-stop, and I can actually take a photo with the camera. Now, this is huge. This is huge for the way that I shoot cars. So a lot of what I shoot is with a strobe, and I'm a one-man band, so I'm out there shooting, and a lot of times I like to use really telephoto lenses to get those shots. And what that means is I set up my camera on a tripod, and I go over, hit the shutter, I go over, move the light, I go back, hit the shutter again. With my Nikon D600, because I was shooting with a 200mm lens and sometimes in bright conditions, the infrared remote that I had just wouldn't work. So it's really nice to be able to have a built-in Wi-Fi solution in this new camera. And I know other cameras have that, so it's not a huge thing, but you know, I've never had that before, so that's actually a really big thing for me and was a huge selling point. Another thing that I really like about this Sony is the fact that they added this controller, this joystick here, that allows you to select your focus points. And that was something that I was really familiar with coming from a Nikon. So this, when you go and select your focus points, you can move it over, select it. And when I was thinking about moving to Sony, I was fortunate enough to be able to borrow a A7iii for a while. And that's something that drove me nuts, is there was no good way to move that focus button. You'd almost have to go in and select it, and then use this button to kind of move it down and move it around. Otherwise, you were counting on autofocus. And if you wanted focus on a specific thing, and let's say you wanted to move that from shot to shot, it was really difficult to do with this camera. So that's something that I really love with the A7 III. All these A7 and numbers, and just hard to keep track of. And then the last thing, actually, two more things. So the next to last thing is eye autofocus. Oh my God, this is such a huge thing. And face detect. So 50% of what I take pictures of are automotive, but then the other 50% is people. So either family photos or senior photos or wedding photos, things like that. And that's where the Sony system is actually absolutely crazy, is their face detect and eye autofocus, where you can just, at the click of a button, it'll go in and focus in exactly on the eye. It'll put a little square around the eye, and you know that that's 100% perfectly in focus. It's just amazing. Whereas with this camera, in order for me to get that focus, I would have to move the point around, get it on the eye, focus, recompose, focus, recompose. It's just a nightmare. And then with this, I mean, it's really just a button click, and the focus point shoots around, it goes right on, locks in, then you can snap your picture. It's just absolutely amazing. And then lastly, the big reason that I switched from Nikon over to Sony is the video capabilities. So a lot of what I do in my day job is I do video, and that's something that I really wanted to do more personal projects on my off time. And unfortunately, the Nikon D600 just was terrible at video. I mentioned earlier about the lack of ability to adjust the aperture once you were in video mode, and you had to exit back out, and you kind of had to guess at your exposure, and it was basically locked out. Now that's something that Nikon's fixed on their newer cameras, but this Sony's autofocus and the video tools that it has with focus peaking and zebras and the ability to control audio, and just their the color science with their log profiles and things like that are just so beyond what Nikon's doing right now. So I hope that this made sense. I hope that this kind of explains why I decided to jump ship to Sony. Long-term plans, I plan on stripping back my kit a little bit too. So with the Nikon D600, you know, I had a 24-70 lens. I had this 28-1.8 lens. I had a 85 1.4. I had a 70-200, and I had a 17-35. So I had a lot of lenses, and a lot of overlap, and I think what in this switch, what I've looked at and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to scale back my lens selection. So I ordered the A7iii. I ordered a 16-35 lens that I will use for wide angle, landscape or automotive shots, particularly my rig shots. So I need something that's at least 17 millimeters. So this lens fits in nicely with that. And then I'm actually going to go with the Sigma lenses. So I've been hugely impressed with the art lenses, and the fact that they're now making E-mount lenses is just incredible. So I actually have on order the 50 millimeter 1.4 Sigma art lens with the E-mount. I'm just waiting for it to ship. It just got delayed again. It was supposed to be end of April. Now it's showing end of May. And then I think what I'm gonna do is order the 135 Sigma Prime as soon as that comes out, and that's supposed to be out late July. So until then, I'm going to be primarily shooting with the 50 millimeter 1.4 and the 16-35. So it should be interesting, but I'm really excited and really happy with this camera. I think it's a beast of a camera, especially for the price. So for $2,000 for the body, it's just insane. And when you compare it to, I paid $2,000 for this body when it came out new. The extra technology that you get in this, and granted it is, you know, 6 years later or so, is really just amazing. So I just wanted to share some initial thoughts. I also did want to show you an image that I took the other day with the 70-200 G Master, and I took this at 10,000 ISO, which I thought was a little bit crazy. So it was indoors. It was a little darker, and almost zero noise in it. So this camera, anything above 3200 ISO, and I was getting kind of scared. 6400 was absolutely the max, but this camera with 10,000 ISO was no problem. So hopefully you found this information valuable. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Otherwise, until next time, take care.